some, I think, very novel insights into a familiar narrative. I'm talking, of course, about the dramatic events that dominate our parsha, the Chet HaMeraglim. So if you're following in your Chumash, I hope you are, because frequently Chaim pays close attention to the nuances and to the particular choice of words for which the text is very useful. So we're at the very beginning of Parashat Shelach Lecha. It's chapter 13, of course, in Bamidbar, in Numbers. Send for yourself men, V'asuras Eretz Canaan, and they shall tour or perhaps reconnoiter the land of Canaan, Asher nosen divnei Israel, which I'm giving to the children of Israel. So or ha-Hayyim finds significance in many of the phrases of this pasuk. In fact, he has a treatment that extends for several pages. I'm going to pick out only some very limited, I think, fascinating observations. So Rashi already says, Shlach lecha anashim. So the Medrash says, of course, anashim, men. Who else are they going to be? Are they going to be monkeys? Are they going to be, some other kind of drones? What do they have? What options do they have? For them, sending women on this kind of dangerous mission wasn't in the radar screen. So why do you need to say Shlach lecha anashim? Isn't it self-evident? So Rashi says that anashim, the word anashim, men, suggests people of stature and indeed people who are righteous, that these were righteous people. And of course, it only magnifies the mystery why they came back with such a terrible and demoralizing and ultimately calamitous report. So again, he has a lot to say, but I just want to pick out an aspect of it, which I find very interesting. Shlach lecha anashim. Shlach means to send. That is to say, Moshe, or really the people, the Jewish people, appealed to Moshe and clamored around Moshe to send spies. So Moshe sent the spies, but because they were shluchim, they were emissaries. So we have a principle that that shlucho shel adam kamoso, that a person's agent, a person's representative is like him. If someone is carrying out an act on his behalf, it's like an agent for a business transaction. So if the solicitor or a broker or another type of agent is empowered to carry out a certain transaction, so of course he's acting in the place of the one who directs him, the one who sends him. So if that's the case, just as we have the principle that shluchei mitzvah einam nizakin, that someone who's involved in a mitzvah project, so he doesn't come to harm because he is endowed with a measure of kedusha, of sanctity, because of the merit and because of the intention of the one who sends him. So it says, or ha-Hayyim, the same thing is in reverse. These were anashim, these were righteous people. What happened? Because they went on a mission of which the intention of those who sent them was negative, was hostile, was unworthy. So whatever their thoughts were and whatever they had in mind vis-a-vis this project, they were only representing the Jewish people who sent them. And therefore, since those who sent them had the wrong intention, so they also were transformed into an agent for the transgression and for the Aveira. So this is how he explains how these people left as righteous. Inherently, initially they were righteous, but they became imbued with the spirit of negativity because they were sent by the Jewish people whose intention, unfortunately, was negative. He also makes the comment, which I believe I've seen in other sources, other places as well, Shlach lecha anashim. So Rashi says, Shlach lecha, send for yourself. Here he says, Ledadcha, in accordance with your intention or your purpose. But it's interesting because in Parshas Lech Lecha, there we have a similar expression. Hashem said to Avram, Lech Lecha, go for yourself. Excuse me. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nirah. So Rashi there says, Lahana ascha, for your benefit. That lecha, lech lecha, go for yourself, means for your benefit. So Or HaChaim says there may be a similar remez here as well. Shelach Lecha, that this mission, which although, as we know very well, ends in catastrophe, but for Moshe, it was actually advantageous. And I always found this comment, and as I said, other Mefarshim mentioned as well, I always found it a little bit cynical. Surely Moshe was not acting in a self-serving manner, but maybe it's just hinting to the fact that actually Moshe was a beneficiary of this mission, although it ended in calamity. How so? In what way did Moshe benefit from it? Who can tell me? Korach did not help Moshe. No, I mean, Korach probably exploited the disillusionment that followed the sin of the spies. But Moshe did benefit in another way. So Or HaChaim quotes a medrash, and there are a few other hints that we find in Chazal to the same idea. But the first instance is one that he quotes, when Moshe was first charged with the mission of redeeming the Jewish people. So as we know, he was very reluctant. He was a reluctant hero of the highest order. And eventually he acquiesced. Hashem kind of essentially forced him. And he said, I'm going to go with Aharon. And so they did. And Moshe and Aharon went to Paro, and they demanded, let my people go. Paro said, in so many words, hell no, they won't go. And on the contrary, he intensified the suffering of the Jewish people. And Moshe was completely despondent and he felt quite betrayed. He said to Hashem, Paro didn't, from the time that you sent me on this mission, he hasn't released them. On the contrary, he's only made it worse. So why did you send me on this fool's errand? I didn't want to do it in the first place. And now you sent me, and I've only made it worse for the Jewish people, and I'm greatly aggrieved. Hashem said to Moshe the words, Ata tir'eh, now you will see. As if to say, hang tight. Until now, it's true. Initially, they haven't gotten off to a promising start, but you shall soon see, Ata tir'eh, you will see how I'm going to carry out my intention, fulfill my promise, punish the Egyptians, redeem the Jewish people, and take them to the promised land. Okay, very good. The problem is that Chazal say, Ata tir'eh, now you will see the downfall of Paro, but you will not see the downfall of the 31 kings who were like warlords or chieftains of Canaan. That you will not see. In other words, because of your impertinence and because of your, whether it was lack of faith or whatever it may have been, you will see this through to its glorious conclusion. You will give the Torah to the Jewish people, etc., but you will not see the downfall of the 31 kings. In other words, in brief, Moshe is not going to enter the land of Israel, even though we find later on other examples and other occasions where that fate is sealed, maybe more explicitly, like after in Parashat Shelach with the water and the rock. But it's already hinted to at this point. Says the Or ha-Hayyim, but since it was already destined that Moshe is going to die in the wilderness, so if the Jewish people had entered the land of Israel right away, either Moshe would have stayed in Chutz La'aretz and had to just watch from afar as a commoner, or he says maybe Moshe would have been able to enter the land of Israel with the rest of the Jewish people, but again, just as a commoner. In other words, he would not behold the glory of the downfall of the kings of Canaan. He would have just been like any other foot soldier, and I suppose a fairly mature one as well. In other words, Moshe, it was destined that he would not retain his position of prominence once the Jewish people enter the land of Israel. So according to that, since the Jewish people instead were condemned to wander for 40 years, Moshe was a beneficiary, because in the end, as a result, he ruled, so to speak, for 40 years longer. That's what he says about Shelach Lecha. As I said, I believe others have said that as well, although I found an Or HaChaim, so it's certainly as I say, part of our approach. Now, he says something else very interesting. V'yasuru es eretz Canaan. Take another look at the pasuk. So we've explained the anashim who were righteous, but they became wicked because of Shelach Lecha, because they were the emissaries, they were the agents of those who were undeserving, unworthy, with negative purpose, and therefore they were transformed for the negative. We've explained Shelach Lecha, the symbolism of the word Lecha, but then he asks another question. Why does it say, they shall spy out the land of Canaan, so that I'm giving to the children of Israel? Don't we know that? That has been repeated not only to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but to the Jewish people, to Moshe. And Moshe has repeated it to the people time and again. Of course, they know that they are destined to inherit the land of Canaan, that Hashem is giving the land of Canaan to them. It could have simply said, they shall, ve'yasus es ha'aretz asher ani nosen lahem. You don't need Canaan. Or you could say Canaan, you don't need that I'm giving to you. Of course, it's very well known that Hashem has promised the land of Canaan to the Jewish people. Why do we need both? So he quotes a medrash, and he himself says, Zederach Jewish. This is just a midrashic interpretation, but he clearly likes it enough to tell us about it, and I'm going to tell you because I learned it in Chaim and I want to share. So he says that the Torah needs both expressions. It mentions Canaan explicitly, and for that matter, with this he explains the whole enterprise, which is one of the great mysteries of, I think, of the entire Torah, how this whole project was ever launched. Whose idea was it? Was it God's idea? Was it Moshe's idea? Was it the people's idea? It ended in catastrophe. Why was it even necessary? Who thought it was necessary? So says the Chaim as follows, that Hashem's intention in authorizing this mission was only for one thing, and that is to enhance the enthusiasm and the state of expectation and the joy of the realization on the part of the Jewish people of the qualities of the land that they are going to inherit. As slaves in Egypt, they may not have known much about the land of Canaan. Seeing is believing, and members of their own community, especially the heads of the tribes, respected and admired people, if they go and see for themselves, they bring back a report, it will give the Jewish people such enthusiasm, such joy, such excitement that they are going to inherit such an outstanding land. It was only for the purpose of causing the Jewish people to love the land that much more. But of course, there's no doubt that the Jewish people could never prevail in a military encounter to dislodge and to displace and to successfully conquer such a land, to displace the Canaanim, who were a powerful and a strong, well defended people. It's only through the gift of God. It's only saying the Bnei Israel. It's only because I'm giving it to you. That land is not yours to conquer. That land is yours by divine blessing, by divine gift. Hashem has promised already generations ago to give it to the Jewish people. That's why it says explicitly, saying the Bnei Israel. That's the land that I'm giving to the Jewish people. It's not a question of military tactics, etc. Even though superficially it does appear that way later on. But this is how Chaim understands it. So why mention Canaan altogether? So here's where he quotes Chazal. Canaan is gematria 190. For those who were with us last year for the Kesher Faithful, we learned last year a lot about Chida. He was my friend for the year. He's got a lot of gematrias. Chaim doesn't use gematrias nearly as frequently, but here's a nice one. Canaan is gematria. Who can tell me? Turn on your microphone. What's the gematria of Canaan? Chaf nun ayin nun. It's not a difficult one. Say it again. Canaan, Chaf is 20, Nun is 50, the other Nun is another 50. Ayin is 70, 190. Canaan is Gematria 190. So the Medrash says that the Torah mentions Canaan specifically here because they were going to inherit the land of Israel. They were going to reap the realization of the promise of the land that Hashem made to the patriarchs in the merit specifically of Yitzchak. It is Yitzchak whose merit is considered to be the most definitive vis-a-vis the land of Israel. Where do we see that hinted to? How does the life of Yitzchak reflect the unshakable link, the inseparable link between Yitzchak of the three patriarchs and the land of Israel? Where do we see that?
He never left the land, I believe.
Very good. That's exactly it. Yitzchak of the three patriarchs is the only one who was born in the land of Israel, who died in the land of Israel, and who never left the land of Israel. One time he wanted to leave. Hashem said, "Don't go. You've got to stay." And so he did. So Yitzchak was born when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 years old. So it's 190 together, the ages of Abraham and Sarah at the time when Yitzchak was born. The birth of Yitzchak sealed the promise of the land of Israel. It guaranteed the fulfillment of that promise that Hashem would grant the land of Israel to the descendants of Abraham and Sarah. So it's 190. He says Zed derech drash, but what he suggests is the reason the Torah says Canaan here is that the Jewish people merited to, and let's say that generation merited to inherit the land of Canaan, specifically because of the iniquity of the Canaanim. He says at that time that they're just, by the way, I'm not making use of my text of ha-Hayyim, so I wrote up the notes separately, but for those who have the text, I'll just mention exactly where to find it if you would like. So it's the paragraph, his comments on this first pasuk, but the paragraph that begins, V'zehu ma'amar asher ani nosein. It's actually just about the end of his extended comments on this first pasuk. If you have the same edition that I have, you'll find it on page Lamed Tes, actually. I think I think Esther, you might have the same edition that I have. So he says the reason is nismale se'eso, that is to say that the iniquity of the Canaanim had reached a breaking point at that time, that they were deserving of being driven out of the land because they had defiled it. Unfortunately, the same had happened to the Jewish people as well. When the time when their time was up also. So he says that's why the Torah mentions Canaan here, because Hashem was going to give them the land of Canaan, because the Canaanim had already reached the limit of their tenure in the land. The transgressions and the iniquity, the degeneracy of the people of Canaan had reached the point that it was time to go. That's how he explains Canaan. And the reference to Asher ani nosein livnei Yisrael, why I'm giving it, that's the whole purpose of the mission, was to enthuse the Jewish people about the land that Hashem would give them, which of course they could never conquer through military prowess alone. They were escaped slaves. They had no possibility through human agency alone, through military might alone, through military prowess, of course not. Okay, I want to now share with you a profound insight, which, as I say to you every time, I found fascinating, and I hope that you will as well. So this is chapter 14, verse 9. Pasuk Tes. So here we have the spies have returned. They have already given their initially favorable report, but it quickly turned sour. Efes ki az ha'am, the people are too powerful. The land is a good land, but it consumes its inhabitants. We'll never conquer it. They are giants. We are grasshoppers. It's hopeless. And the whole idea is beyond our ability to accomplish, and we're goners. Kalev and Yehoshua sought to dispute them, but it was to no avail, as of course we know. They were outnumbered, and the Jewish people took up the cry and the wail. And Kalev tried one last time, and he said that, again in Pasuk Yud Tes, I need to find it, Yud Daled rather, sorry, it's chapter Yud Daled Pasuk Tes. He said, or they said together, Kalev and Yehoshua said, Ach, Bashem al timrodu, do not rebel against God. Va'atem al tir'u es amharz, do not fear the people of the land. Ki lachmenu heim, because they are our bread. Sar tzilam me alehem, their protective shade has departed from them. V'Hashem itanu, and God is with us. Al tira'um, do not be afraid. So they repeat twice at the beginning and at the end, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Ki lachmenu heim. Now, this is an expression which is unusual. The meaning is clear. Rashi says we can eat them like bread. You know, bread is the staple food. We eat bread every day, and we'll eat them up as well. But the turn of phrase still requires an explanation. Why do we find that particular usage in this instance? And what is the deeper symbolism of lachmenu heim? They are our bread. So Chaim says the Anshe Emes, the people of truth, by which he means the Kabbalists. So those who are heir, or maybe they are revealing the Kabbalistic tradition, I suppose both. They are have access to it and they have revealed it to us. And he's alluding here to the Ari and his disciples. And this idea is found in the writings of the Ari. There's even a reference here in the edition that I have where it can be found. So he says the Anshe Emes have an approach to this question that begins with the following observation. God has created the world, and he has created mankind, and he's created all life, certainly all animal life, with a need to eat and a need to drink. There can be no life, not only human life, but there can be no life of any sort without food and without drink, without nourishment. He says, why did God create man in that way? Surely it would have been within God's means to have created mankind and maybe other forms of life as well without the need to eat and to drink. Not in the world as we know it, but God could have created the world in a different way. Hashem could have created the world in such a way that man can live through oxygen alone. I know David Nachal in the boot camp that we do regularly, he always says, you've got to breathe, the breathing is important, how to breathe and when to breathe and all of that. Breathing and oxygen. Obviously, oxygen is essential not just for life, but for health also, especially those who have had any contact or any experience of this terrible coronavirus. Ultimately, the respiration is the cause of death, tragically in many cases with this disease. But anyway, breathing is important, but breathing is not enough. We cannot live on thin air alone. And he says, why do we need it? And he says, actually, if we didn't have to eat and drink, then we could have spent a lot more time learning Torah. And not only that, but, we would have been freed of quite a few activities which are distracting, some of which are a bit unglamorous, even unpleasant, shechita, slaughtering animals, cleaning chickens, things of that sort, not to mention the biological, the digestive system, which sometimes can go wrong, and even when it goes right, wouldn't we be life would be more noble without it? That's the question. So he says, my answer would be, said Chaim, I've got an answer. I would say that of the Taryag mitzvahs, so many of them are dependent on eating and drinking, food production, from plowing and planting and truma and maaser, and many mitzvahs of the relate to the agricultural process, and also baking and separating challah. Of course, Shabbos and Yom Tov, many laws relate to what is allowed, what is not allowed. Besides with Shechita, Birkat HaMazon, all of these are mitzvahs min HaTorah, and so many of them relate to the process of food. Without food, we wouldn't have them. I mean, all the laws of the kosher laws, would not be relevant if we weren't eating. So he says the Hashem desired us to have these commandments of the Torah, so they are dependent on eating and drinking. But he acknowledges that his answer is sort of an intellectual answer, but he says the Kabbalists have another approach. And he says as follows, that sorry, I just want to be sure I've given you the right reference. Yeah, so in the ha-Hayyim, the edition that I'm using, I'm sorry. Sorry, just want to be able to give you the pasuk. Yeah, it's on page Memhei in the edition that I have, and it's pasuk tes. As I said, it's chapter 14, verse 9. Kilachmeinu heim says, Anshe ha'emes hosifu b'zeh tam l'shvach b'derech klal. Kol ikar hanivrai ma'alin b'kodesh b'sod ha'berurim shel nitzotze ha'kedusha. We spoke last week about the idea of redeeming the sparks of holiness. But today he looks into that much more deeply. He says that life itself, the objective of the human purpose in this world is to redeem and to extract the sparks of holiness that exist in all of life itself. And he says, especially in food, he says that the process of birur nitzotzos, of redeeming and liberating the sparks of holiness that exist in everything around us, this is the purpose of the Jewish people. And he says that all of these sparks of holiness are called lechem am Hashem, the bread of the people of God. He says nothing can exist if it has no holiness within it, that it's only the divine endowment of sanctity, of Kedusha, which allows anything to exist. A person, he says, even an unclean animal, even a rasha, even a wicked person, he says, even the sitra achra itself, even the force of evil, even the Satan can only exist because there is some spark of holiness within him. Otherwise, nothing could exist altogether. And he says, I'll just read you a few words. Uvehi pared nitzotz hachiyoni mimakomo, and when the spark of holiness is removed, is extricated from its place, Yisbatel v'yovad habinyan, the edifice will collapse. So if someone is wicked, there is holiness within that person. If the holiness is removed, I mean, if the holiness overwhelms or somehow becomes more prominent than the wickedness, then that Rasha would become a righteous person. I'm sure that would be, no doubt, the best outcome. But philosophically, when something is denuded of its sanctity, then it will collapse and cease to exist. He says, as a magnet attracts metal filings, so the same is true that a person who is kadosh, who is holy, will attract holiness from the things around him. And that includes even the food that he eats. When a holy, righteous person eats food, then the food nourishes him not only because of the biological or the chemical properties, but in the spiritual way as well. I don't think it's only for a righteous person. It's true for every person, because according to this Kabbalistic doctrine, together with the nutritive value of food, there's also spiritual value as well. So he says that's why Yoshua and Caleb say, Sar tzilam me alehem. I'm sorry, they say, Kilachmenuhem, they are our bread. When he says that their sail has been removed, what he means is that the protective component, that which represents the Kedusha within them, has been taken, has left them. That is to say, we have the capacity to draw out the Kedusha, and then the physical residue, the physical shell, will just collapse of its own accord. He says that when the Meraglim, Yehoshua and Caleb, when they said, Al tiru es amars, don't be afraid of them, kilachmenu heim, just as food which a person eats, he extracts the holiness within him, consumes the food, and in that way, the food contributes to his development and to his betterment, spiritually as well as physically. God is with us. God is the greatest source of Kedusha. So just as we said, Kedusha is like a magnet that draws out the holy sparks. So Hashem is the greatest magnet in the universe. Hashem is with us. So Hashem has enabled us, will enable us to draw out the sparks of holiness within our adversaries, and then there's nothing left to them. They're begun in a heartbeat. Al tiraum, do not be afraid of them. That's how he explains this turn of phrase, kilachmenuhem, because they are our bread. I just want to end, I know our time is pretty much up, but I would like to just end with a short, more positive note, which I love very much because it reflects keen insight into the human condition. Everyone knows, certainly in this learned group, that the spies were 12 in number, of whom 10 were iniquitous, or at least came back with an evil report, and they were punished for it. Of course, 2 were righteous and remained so, and sought, as we've just seen now, to refute the Meraglim, but unsuccessfully. Of course, we know those 2 were Caleb and Yehoshua. Or we might say Yehoshua and Caleb, because Yehoshua surely is the more prominent of them. As we know, we find him many times already in the Torah previously. He was the valet of Moshe. He led the battle against Amalek. And as we very well know, ultimately he would succeed Moshe, and he would be the one to bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel. So Yehoshua is very well known, Caleb less so. And yet, if you take a look in chapter 14, verse 24, please turn briefly to Pasuk Chaf Daled. We find that Hashem says that all of the people, meaning all of the spies, they're going to die right away. The children of Israel, those above the age of 20, also will die in the subsequent 40 years. Va'avdi Kalev, but my servant Kalev, because there was a different spirit within him, and he was faithful to me. So I'm going to take him into the land. He and Yehoshua will be the only ones. But Yehoshua is not mentioned in this pasuk, just Caleb. So the 2 questions are, why is Yehoshua not mentioned? Surely he is of equal stature, and he should, is worthy of praise in a similar way. And as we know, he did take the Jewish people into the land of Israel. He was the successor to Moshe himself. Also, what is the meaning of that expression? Akev, as a result of, as a consequence of Haisa Ruach Acheres Imo, a different spirit within him. So the usual understanding is that he had a different spirit, different than whom? I know we're over time.
Yehoshua.
Well, that's not the simple understanding. The simple understanding is because Hashem has said how he's punishing the people as a whole. If you look in the previous couple of verses, and when he turns to Caleb, it's evident from the context, the Ruach HaCharesh, he had a different spirit than the rest of the spies. The other spies were traitorous, and he was faithful. But ha-Hayyim says he was different than Yehoshua. But in what way was he different? Explains ha-Hayyim, he had a different spirit with him. Yehoshua had I don't know whether it's a secret weapon or a revealed weapon, but he had a potent weapon against the forces of evil. That means the spies and even maybe his own Yetzer Hara. He had a potent defense, and that defense was provided by Moshe, who changed his name from Hosea to Yehoshua. And Rashi says that Moshe prayed to Hashem, may God save you from the plot of the spies. So Yehoshua, in that sense, had it easy because Moshe prayed for him. Moshe kind of augmented Yehoshua's natural righteousness. So Yehoshua, he sailed through. What about Kalev? Says the ha-Hayyim, Ruach Acheres, the Ruach Acheres, another spirit. That means to say he had a Yetzer Hara within him. He had a Yetzer Hara, Ruach Acheres, Acher, like we have the Sitra Achra, the other side, the forces of evil. He had an evil spirit within him, as we all do, because that's the human condition. But not only did he have it within him, he had it all around him, because he was there with 10 spies. So Ruach Acheres, he had 10 spies who were not just conspiring against him, but who were exercising influence over him. And he had his own Yetzer Hara as well. Ruach Acheres imo. Take a look at the pasuk. Avdi Kalev ekev haisa Ruach Acheres imo, with him, within him. He had a Ruach Acheres. He had the Yetzer Hara, but he prevailed over it with a lot of effort. He went to Hebron and he prayed at the grave sites of the patriarchs. He went to Ma'aras HaMachpelah. He was maybe the first tourist to visit Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and he went to pray there. And in the merit of his prayers, he overcame the Yetzer Hara, and he managed to remain stalwart in his rejection of the Meraglim. Sadly, it was to no avail. But this is the greatness of Kalev. That's why Kalev is praised. Yehoshua had help from Moshe. Kalev had help from his own innate greatness to overcome the Yetzer Hara within him and the forces of the Meraglim around him. But it's Akev. And the word Akev means as a consequence. It also means reward, because reward and consequence are closely connected. So Akev Haisa, his reward is because he had Ruach Acheres imo within him. He had a Yetzer Hara, as we all do. But Yehoshua had external help. Kalev had internal help through his own endeavors, and this is why he is rewarded. And or Chaim mentions that a person who has an opportunity to commit an Aveira and he avoids it, so he is rewarded as if he had done a mitzvah. So the fact that he resisted the blandishments and the influence of the Meraglim, of the other spies, that is his greatness, and that's why he was rewarded. And by the way, he was rewarded with the assurance that he would enter the land. I will bring him to the land, and his descendants will inherit it, which means that he was one of the few people ever who was guaranteed to live another 40 years. Other people were dying day by day or year by year, and he was guaranteed to live another 40 years. That's great. Says ha-Hayyim, you know what? If a person knows he's going to live for 40 years, very easy to take your foot off the accelerator. It's very easy to kick back. It's a bit like working from home, you know. You don't have the same demands, the same expectations of yourself or others have of you. It's easy to just coast along. And says ha-Hayyim, never, despite that, he says clearly, lo zaz, he did not depart, he did not desist from his ardent service of God. And that's why it says Avdi Kalev. He was one of the few people ever, Moshe Rabbeinu was one of the others, who was given the designation Va'avdi Kalev. He's called an Eved Hashem. Hashem says, my servant Kalev, because even though I've rewarded him for the next 40 years, he could kick back and wouldn't have to work so hard, because he's in like Flynn. He's going to live for 40 years and enter the land anyway. He knows that, but he didn't. He didn't do that. He retained his righteousness, and he sought to always improve in his avodas Hashem day by day. This is the greatness of Kalev, because Ruach Acheres imo, he had the negative ruach, the negative force within him, as we all do, and nevertheless he overcame that. This is the greatness of Kalev. I'm sorry we've run over by a few minutes, but I did say at the beginning, it's fascinating material, and because it is such an important parsha, I find, the Meraglim. So I hope you don't mind. We've gone over a few minutes. So thank you very much. And I wish everyone a wonderful Shabbos. And those who would like to join us from Ma'ariv in the Zoom experience, we'll do that right now.